Do you have any leftover bread? The woman's voice trembled slightly as she leaned over the counter of Harrington's bakery, her eyes darting nervously around the cozy establishment. She clutched the hand of a small boy, no more than 6 years old, who stood quietly beside her, his worn sneakers scuffing against the polished floor. Her clothes, though clean, showed signs of wear, a small tear carefully mended on her sleeve, the faded color of a jacket washed too many times. Behind her, in the corner booth by the large window overlooking Main Street, sat Garrett Donovan, CEO of Donovan Enterprises, one of the largest real estate development firms on the East Coast. He glanced up from his laptop, momentarily distracted by the hesitancy in the woman's voice. His morning ritual of coffee and a fresh croissant at Harrington's before heading to his office had been interrupted, and for some reason he couldn't look away from the scene unfolding before him. "I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't give away our day-old bread until closing," replied Martha, the bakery owner, her voice kind but firm. "But we will have some marked down in the afternoon if you'd like to come back then." The woman's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly, but she quickly straightened up, forcing a smile. "I understand, thank you anyway." She turned to leave, gently tugging her son's hand. "Mommy, I'm still hungry," the boy whispered, just loud enough for Garrett to hear. "It's okay, Tyler," she responded softly. "We'll figure something out." Something about her dignity in the face of obvious struggle made Garrett set down his coffee cup with more force than intended. He was used to making split-second decisions that affected millions of dollars, but this impulse felt different. "Wait," he called out before he could analyze why he was getting involved. The woman turned, her eyes meeting his, warm brown eyes filled with a mixture of pride and desperation. "I'd like to buy breakfast for you and your son." He gestured to his table. "Please join me." The woman hesitated, and Garrett could see the internal battle raging within her, pride versus necessity. "I don't accept charity from strangers," she said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. "It's not charity," Garrett heard himself saying. "It's a simple kindness, one human to another. Plus, I hate eating alone." The last part was a lie. He preferred his solitude, especially in the mornings when his mind was already racing with the day's agenda. After a moment that felt much longer than it was, she nodded. "Thank you. I'm Valerie Bennett. This is my son, Tyler." "Garrett Donovan," he responded, standing to pull out a chair for her. He watched as she helped her son into the seat across from his laptop, which displayed spreadsheets detailing the potential acquisition of a historic building downtown, a deal that would likely net his company millions. Somehow those numbers seemed less significant now. "Order anything you'd like," he told them, and after a gentle nudge from his mother, Tyler asked for a chocolate chip muffin and hot chocolate, his eyes lighting up when Martha brought over the largest muffin in the display case. Valerie ordered only a plain bagel with cream cheese and coffee, despite Garrett's encouragement to choose something more substantial. As they ate, Garrett learned that Valerie was a single mother working 2 part-time jobs, administrative assistant by day and waitress 3 nights a week. Tyler was in 1st grade at Lincoln Elementary. They had moved to Bedford Falls just 3 months ago, after Valerie had lost her full-time position when her previous employer downsized. "This week has been particularly tight," she admitted, the words seemingly pulled from her reluctantly. "My car needed repairs, and it wiped out what little savings I had. We'll be fine once I get paid on Friday." Her chin lifted slightly, a gesture of defiance against circumstances that kept pushing her down. Garrett found himself intrigued by her resilience. In his world of corporate acquisitions and power lunches, people were always either trying to impress him or get something from him. Valerie's straightforward dignity was refreshing. She wasn't seeking pity, she was simply doing whatever it took to care for her son. "What brought you to Bedford Falls?" he asked, genuinely curious. "A fresh start," she said, her fingers curling around the warm coffee mug. "After Tyler's father left, we needed to rebuild somewhere new. My aunt used to live here and always talked about what a wonderful community it was." She paused. "It has been, mostly. People have been kind. I just underestimated how difficult it would be to establish ourselves." Tyler, who had been quietly eating his muffin, looked up at Garrett. "Do you like superheroes? I'm going to draw comic books when I grow up." He pulled a slightly crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and smoothed it out on the table. It was a surprisingly detailed drawing of a caped figure for a child his age. "That's very good," Garrett said, genuinely impressed. You have real talent. Mom says I get it from my grandfather. Tyler beamed. He was an artist too, but he had to work in a factory instead. Valerie's eyes softened. My father could have been great, but life got in the way. He always encouraged me to follow my dreams, though. She glanced at her watch and startled. Tyler, we need to get you to school. We've taken up enough of Mr. Donovan's time. As they prepared to leave, Garrett found himself reluctant to end the encounter. Something about their story had stirred something long dormant within him. A memory of his own childhood struggles before his later success, perhaps, or simply the human connection that had become so rare in his carefully structured life. Here, he said impulsively, reaching for his wallet and extracting several bills. Please, take this. Valerie's expression immediately closed off. I told you, we don't need charity. It's not charity, Garrett insisted, though he knew it might appear that way. Consider it an advance. An advance for what? Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. It was a good question, one he hadn't fully formed an answer to until the words came out of his mouth. My company is looking for a new office manager, someone detail-oriented, responsible, who can handle pressure. Based on what you've told me about juggling 2 jobs and caring for your son, you seem exceptionally qualified. The starting salary is substantial with benefits. It wasn't entirely a fabrication. His current office manager had given notice last week, planning to retire at the end of the month. Valerie stared at him, clearly trying to determine if this was some kind of trick. You don't know anything about my qualifications. I'm a good judge of character, Garrett replied. It's kept me in business for 15 years. Come to my office tomorrow morning for a proper interview. He reached into his suit jacket and extracted a business card, placing it on the table between them. No obligations, just a conversation. Tyler tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mom, we're going to be late. After a moment's hesitation, Valerie picked up the card, her fingers brushing against the embossed lettering. Thank you for breakfast, Mr. Donovan. I'll think about the interview. As they walked out the door, Tyler turned back and waved enthusiastically. Garrett found himself waving back, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. He watched through the window as they hurried down the sidewalk, the boy skipping occasionally to keep up with his mother's brisk pace. Martha approached his table, coffee pot in hand. More coffee? Yes, please, he replied distractedly, his mind still following Valerie and Tyler down the street. That was a kind thing you did, Martha commented, as she refilled his cup. Garrett shrugged, already reaching for his laptop to return to work. It was nothing. But as he stared at the spreadsheets on his screen, the numbers refused to hold his attention. For the first time in years, Garrett Donovan found himself thinking about something other than the next deal, the next acquisition, the next victory in the corporate battlefield. He was thinking about a single mother's pride, a child's innocent smile, and the strange feeling that his carefully constructed life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate. Garrett arrived at his office earlier than usual the next morning, his thoughts still lingering on the encounter with Valerie and Tyler. He found himself rearranging items on his desk, straightening the already perfectly aligned family photo, his sister Megan with her husband and 2 children, the closest thing to family he had since losing his parents in a car accident 15 years ago. He wasn't entirely sure why he felt so unsettled by the prospect of Valerie's potential interview. It wasn't like him to make impulsive business decisions, especially regarding personnel. You're 9 a.m. Here's here, announced Diane, his soon-to-retire office manager, through the intercom at precisely 8:45. Garrett checked his watch, surprised. Send her in. Valerie entered his office with the same quiet dignity she had displayed in the bakery, though today she wore a simple navy blue dress that, while not designer quality, was professional and well-maintained. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, revealing high cheekbones and those expressive brown eyes that had haunted his thoughts. You're early, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I believe in making a good first impression, she replied, sitting down with her back straight, a small portfolio clutched in her hands. And I wanted to thank you again for yesterday. Tyler talked about that chocolate chip muffin all evening. Garrett smiled despite himself. How is he? He's well. My neighbor agreed to take him to school today. She placed her portfolio on the desk between them. I brought my resume and references. I want to be clear that if you're considering me for a position, it should be based on my qualifications, not circumstances. Garrett appreciated her directness. Absolutely. Tell me about your experience." For the next 30 minutes, he listened as Valerie detailed her work history. An associate's degree in business administration, 5 years as an administrative assistant at a marketing firm in Philadelphia, followed by a promotion to office coordinator before the company's downsizing. Her references included her former supervisor and the owner of a small accounting firm where she had worked part-time. What impressed Garrett most, however, wasn't listed on her resume. It was the way she spoke about problem-solving, about managing difficult personalities, about finding creative solutions with limited resources. These were skills honed not in boardrooms, but in the crucible of real-life challenges. "Why office management?" he asked, genuinely curious. "With your organizational skills, you could pursue many paths." Something flickered across her face, a brief shadow of a deeper story. "It offers stability," she said finally. "And I'm good at it. Being a single parent means making practical choices. Dreams can wait. Tyler can't." The simplicity and truth of her statement struck him. In his world, people chased ambition relentlessly, often sacrificing everything else on the altar of success. He had done the same. Building Donovan Enterprises from the ground up after his parents' death left him with little more than an insurance payout and burning determination. He had achieved everything he'd set out to accomplish, yet something had been lost along the way, something he couldn't quite name. What would you do if stability wasn't a concern? The question slipped out before he could consider its inappropriateness in an interview setting. Valerie seemed surprised by the personal nature of the question, but answered thoughtfully. "I'd finish my bachelor's degree. Maybe teach." A small smile touched her lips. "My father always said I explained things in ways that made sense, even when they were complicated." Before Garrett could respond, his intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Reynolds and the investment team are waiting in the conference room," Diane reminded him. "Thank you," he replied, then turned back to Valerie. "I apologize, but I have a meeting I can't reschedule. Diane will show you around the office and explain more about the position." He stood, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming in." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Donovan." "Garrett," he corrected, surprising himself again. As he headed toward the conference room, Garrett found himself taking a detour past Diane's desk. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. The older woman, who had been with the company since its inception and never hesitated to speak her mind, smiled knowingly. "She's overqualified for the position as it stands. But if you're looking for someone who could grow into a larger role, someone with both skill and integrity, she's exceptional." Throughout the meeting with his investment team, discussing the potential redevelopment of a historic warehouse district, Garrett found his attention divided. Jason Reynolds, his chief financial officer and closest friend, noticed his distraction. "You're a million miles away today," Jason commented, as the others filed out after the meeting concluded. "That's not like you. Everything okay?" Garrett hesitated before sharing the story of meeting Valerie and Tyler at the bakery. "I offered her Diane's position." Jason's eyebrows rose. "Based on a conversation over breakfast? That's not your usual meticulous hiring process." "She's qualified," Garrett said defensively. "More than qualified." "I'm sure," Jason replied with a careful neutrality that suggested he was choosing his words deliberately. "But I know you, Garrett. There's something else going on here, was there?" Garrett wasn't entirely sure himself. He only knew that the encounter in the bakery had awakened something he'd long suppressed, a memory of his own mother struggling to make ends meet after his father's business failed, before the accident that took them both. He remembered the mix of pride and desperation, the determination to give her children opportunities despite overwhelming odds. "It's just a job offer," Garrett insisted. "Nothing more." Jason looked unconvinced, but didn't press further. "The Peterson contract needs your signature by end of day," he reminded Garrett, changing the subject as he headed for the door. "And don't forget the charity gala on Friday. The mayor specifically asked if you'd be there." Alone in his office once more, Garrett found himself staring at the family photo on his desk. His sister often urged him to get out more, to meet someone, to build a life beyond Donovan Enterprises. He had always dismissed her concerns, insisting he was perfectly content with his life as it was. The company was his creation, his legacy, his purpose. What more did he need? Yet the memory of Tyler's bright eyes as he talked about superheroes and Valerie's quiet strength as she navigated a world determined to push her down kept intruding on his thoughts. Before he could analyze his motivations further, he picked up the phone and dialed Diane's extension. "Send Ms. Bennett back in, please." Valerie returned moments later, her expression guarded. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," Garrett assured her. "Please, sit down." He waited until she was settled before continuing. "I'd like to offer you the position of executive assistant to the CEO, effective immediately." Her eyes widened. "That's not the position I interviewed for." "No," he agreed. "It's a higher position with greater responsibilities and compensation." He named a figure that caused her to inhale sharply. "You'd work directly with me on various projects, managing my schedule, coordinating with department heads and occasionally representing the company at functions." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Your qualifications exceed what we need in an office manager. This role would better utilize your skills." Valerie sat in silence for a long moment, her fingers laced tightly together in her lap. "May I ask why? The real reason?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Most people would have simply accepted such an offer gratefully, no questions asked. But Valerie Bennett, it seemed, was not most people. "Because I recognize potential when I see it," Garrett said finally, opting for honesty. "And because I remember what it's like to need a break, just one opportunity to prove your worth." Something in his voice must have conveyed his sincerity, because the wariness in her eyes softened slightly. "When would you need me to start?" "Monday." "Diane will spend the next 2 weeks training you before her retirement." He hesitated, then added, "The position includes comprehensive benefits, including health insurance for you and Tyler, immediately effective." At the mention of benefits for her son, Valerie's carefully maintained composure faltered momentarily. She blinked rapidly, then nodded once, decisively. "I accept, thank you." As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Garrett couldn't help but wonder if he was making a mistake. Not professionally, as he had no doubt about Valerie's capabilities, but personally. There was something about Valerie Bennett that unsettled him, that made him question the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself over the years. But as she left his office with a new lightness in her step, Garrett pushed those thoughts aside. This was simply a business decision, he told himself, nothing more. Yet the strange feeling of anticipation lingering in his chest suggested otherwise. 3 months later, as winter settled over Bedford Falls with a blanket of pristine snow, Garrett found himself marveling at how quickly Valerie had become indispensable. She managed his chaotic schedule with effortless precision, anticipated his needs before he voiced them, and brought a refreshing efficiency to operations that even Diane, with all her years of experience, hadn't achieved. More surprising was how she had begun to influence the company culture itself. The staff holiday party, traditionally a stiff affair at an upscale restaurant, had been transformed under Valerie's guidance into a family-friendly gathering at a local community center, complete with activities for children and a gift drive for local families in need. Attendance had nearly doubled from previous years. "You've made quite an impression," Garrett commented, as they reviewed the upcoming week's schedule in his office on a frigid December morning. "I've never seen Mitchell from accounting voluntarily socialize before, yet there he was at the party, helping children decorate cookies." Valerie smiled, the expression lighting up her face in a way that Garrett found increasingly distracting. Everyone wants to belong somewhere, to feel valued. Sometimes they just need permission to show who they really are. It was observations like these, simple yet profound, that had begun to shift Garrett's perspective on both his company and his life. He found himself looking forward to their morning briefings, deliberately extending them with questions that could have been handled via email. He enjoyed watching her mind work, the thoughtful way she considered problems before offering solutions. He had also found reasons to interact with Tyler, first by asking about his drawings, then by suggesting educational programs the boy might enjoy, and eventually by attending a school art show where Tyler's work was displayed. The boy's enthusiasm was contagious, his perspective uncomplicated by the cynicism that often accompanied adulthood. "You seem different lately," Jason observed over lunch at their usual spot near the office. "More present. Less consumed by the next deal," Garrett shrugged, uncomfortable with his friend's scrutiny. "I'm delegating more. It's good for the company." Delegating to Valerie Bennett, specifically, Jason noted with raised eyebrows. Who, coincidentally, you've mentioned at least 5 times during this lunch alone. She's an exceptional employee, Garrett replied defensively. I'm sure that's all it is, Jason said, his tone making it clear he believed otherwise. Just be careful, Garrett. Office relationships are complicated enough without the power dynamics at play here. Garrett dismissed his friend's concerns with a wave of his hand. You're imagining things. Our relationship is strictly professional. But later that day, as he watched Valerie interact with clients in the conference room, explaining complex project timelines with remarkable clarity, Garrett was forced to acknowledge that his feelings had indeed crossed into territory beyond professional admiration. There was something about her genuine nature, her quiet resilience, and yes, the warm depth of her brown eyes that had begun to occupy his thoughts even outside of work hours. The realization was unsettling. Garrett had built his life around control and predictability. Emotional entanglements were messy, unpredictable, and potentially disastrous, especially with an employee, as Jason had pointed out. Better to maintain professional boundaries and ignore these inconvenient feelings. His resolution lasted precisely 3 days, until a snowstorm hit the city with unexpected ferocity late one afternoon. Garrett insisted on driving Valerie home, concerned about her navigating the treacherous roads on public transportation. Really, I'll be fine, she protested, as they stood in the lobby, watching the snow accumulate at an alarming rate outside the glass doors. We've dealt with worse in Philadelphia. It's not negotiable, Garrett replied, his tone brooking no argument. Consider it a safety requirement. The drive to Valerie's modest apartment was tense with unspoken awareness, the small confines of his luxury sedan intensifying the strange electricity that had been building between them for weeks. Tyler had gone home earlier with a neighbor when schools closed at noon, so they were alone for the first time outside the office setting. Thank you for this, Valerie said softly as they pulled up outside her building. Would you like to come up for coffee? At least until the roads improve a bit. Every logical part of Garrett's brain screamed that this was a line he shouldn't cross, but logic seemed powerless against the pull he felt toward Valerie Bennett. I'd like that, he heard himself say. Her apartment was small but welcoming, decorated with an artist's eye for color and light despite the obvious budget constraints. Tyler's artwork adorned the walls, interspersed with framed photographs and small treasures that spoke of a life built on meaning rather than material wealth. It was the antithesis of Garrett's sleek, professionally decorated penthouse, yet he felt more at ease here than he had in his own home for years. Tyler will be thrilled you're here, Valerie said, moving to the kitchen to put on coffee. He talks about you constantly. You've made quite an impression. He's a remarkable kid, Garrett replied honestly. You've done an amazing job with him, especially under difficult circumstances. Valerie paused, her back to him, as she measured coffee grounds. His father wasn't always absent, you know. James was complicated, brilliant, but unstable. When he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, he refused treatment, insisted he could handle it himself. Her shoulders tensed slightly. He couldn't. The day he left, he said he was protecting us from himself. Tyler was only 4. The revelation of this piece of her past, freely shared, felt significant. I'm sorry, Garrett said, wishing he had better words to offer. She turned to face him, her expression composed once more. Life rarely goes according to plan. The trick is to adapt without becoming bitter. She smiled suddenly. Something you're learning too, I think. What do you mean? When I first met you, you were all sharp edges and rigid control. You've softened since then. You listen more. You consider perspectives beyond the bottom line. She handed him a mug of coffee. It suits you. Before Garrett could formulate a response, the door burst open and Tyler rushed in, followed by an older woman Garrett recognized as Mrs. Potts, their neighbor. Mr. Donovan, Tyler exclaimed, his excitement palpable. Did you come to see our Christmas tree? Mom and I decorated it last weekend. He grabbed Garrett's hand without hesitation, pulling him toward a small artificial tree adorned with handmade ornaments and twinkling lights. It's beautiful, Garrett said sincerely, allowing himself to be led around the apartment as Tyler proudly showed him various treasures. Mrs. Potts exchanged knowing glances with Valerie before departing with promises to call later about weekend plans. The 3 of them settled into an unexpectedly comfortable evening, sharing a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread that Tyler proudly helped prepare. As the snow continued to fall outside, creating a cocoon of white silence around the building, Garrett felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. This feeling, this warmth of connection, was what had been missing from his life of achievements and acquisitions. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. The idyllic evening came to an abrupt end with a phone call that caused Valerie's expression to shift from contentment to concern. "Yes, this is she," she said, moving away from the table. "When? How serious? I understand. Yes, I'll be there first thing tomorrow." When she hung up, her face had gone pale. "Tyler, honey, why don't you go get ready for bed? I need to talk to Mr. Donovan about some work things." Once Tyler had reluctantly departed for his bedroom, Valerie sank into her chair. That was the hospital in Philadelphia. James, Tyler's father, was admitted after a suicide attempt. She ran a hand over her face. "They found my contact information in his wallet. Apparently, I'm still listed as his emergency contact." "I'm so sorry," Garrett said, reaching across the table to take her hand without thinking. "What do you need?" "I need to go to Philadelphia tomorrow. James has no other family, and regardless of our past, I can't just—" She trailed off, clearly conflicted. "The problem is Tyler. Mrs. Potts is visiting her daughter this weekend, and my other backup is out of town. I could take him with me, but seeing his father like that—" "I'll watch him," Garrett offered immediately, surprising them both. "If that's all right with you and with Tyler, of course." Valerie stared at him, clearly stunned by the offer. "You? Watch an 8-year-old boy for an entire weekend? Garrett, your schedule is packed with meetings." "Which can be rescheduled," he interrupted. "This is important. Family is important." He hesitated, then added, "Let me help, Valerie. Please." Something shifted in her expression then, a softening that made his heart race. "Why are you doing this? All of it. The job, the kindness to Tyler, and now this. What do you want from us?" It was the question Garrett had been avoiding asking himself for months. Looking into her eyes, he finally confronted the truth. "I want to be part of your lives," he admitted quietly, "in whatever way you'll allow." The vulnerability of the confession hung in the air between them, changing everything. Valerie's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and fear flickering across her face. Before either could speak further, Tyler's voice called from his bedroom, asking for help finding his favorite pajamas. "We'll talk more after I get him settled," Valerie said, standing quickly. "This conversation isn't finished." But when she returned 30 minutes later, she found Garrett on the phone, his expression grave. "I understand. Yes, I'll be there immediately. Have security meet me downstairs." He hung up and turned to Valerie with regret etched on his features. "There's been a break-in at the office. The alarm company called. I have to go." "Of course," she said, disappointment evident despite her understanding. "Be careful on the roads." Garrett hesitated at the door, wanting to say more but knowing this wasn't the time. "I meant what I said about watching Tyler." "Think about it." She nodded, and he left, stepping back into the swirling snow with the feeling that something monumental had just occurred, something that would forever alter the carefully constructed life he had built. What neither of them could have anticipated was how the simple act of offering to care for a child would set in motion a chain of events that would test the fragile connection building between them, forcing both to confront truths about themselves they had long avoided. The break-in at Donovan Enterprises turned out to be far more serious than a simple burglary. Someone had accessed the company's secure servers, targeting files specifically related to the historic warehouse district redevelopment, Garrett's largest project to date. The timing couldn't have been worse, with the final city council vote on zoning changes scheduled for the following week. By the time Garrett emerged from emergency meetings with his security team and the police early Saturday morning, he was exhausted and frustrated. The investigation pointed to an inside job, someone with access codes and intimate knowledge of the company's systems. The thought that someone he trusted might have betrayed him left a bitter taste in his mouth. When he finally checked his phone, he found several missed calls and a text message from Valerie. "Had to leave for Philadelphia early, Mrs. Potts' daughter came home unexpectedly and is watching Tyler. Call when you can." Disappointment washed over him, followed by guilt. He had offered to help, then disappeared when she needed him. It felt like a metaphor for every relationship he had ever attempted and failed to maintain. Without giving himself time to reconsider, Garrett dialed Mrs. Potts' number, which Valerie had added to his contacts in case of emergency weeks ago. 20 minutes later, he was standing on her doorstep, explaining his proposal to the skeptical older woman. "I understand your concerns," he told her, "but I promised Valerie I would help with Tyler, and I intend to keep that promise." Mrs. Potts studied him with shrewd eyes. "That boy has had enough disappointment in his life. If you're doing this to impress his mother—" "I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do," Garrett interrupted, "and because Tyler deserves stability." Something in his expression must have convinced her, because after a long moment she nodded. "I'll call Valerie to confirm, but if she agrees, you can take him. He's still sleeping. Rough night with nightmares about his father. Poor thing picks up on more than adults realize." An hour later, Tyler was sleepily climbing into Garrett's car, clutching his backpack and a well-worn stuffed dinosaur. "Mom said you're taking care of me until she gets back tomorrow," he said, studying Garrett with serious eyes. "Do you know how to make pancakes? Mom always makes pancakes on Saturdays." Garrett, who couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked anything more complicated than microwave popcorn, smiled. "I'm sure we can figure it out together." What followed was one of the strangest weekends of Garrett's life. Strange not because of the challenges of caring for an 8-year-old boy, though there were certainly those, but because of how natural it began to feel. They made lopsided pancakes with considerable mess, built an elaborate fort in Garrett's rarely used living room, and spent hours at the Children's Science Museum. Through it all, Tyler's perspective on the world, his curiosity, his resilience, his openness to joy despite the uncertainties in his young life, affected Garrett profoundly. This child had faced loss and instability, yet remained hopeful, whereas Garrett, with all his wealth and success, had allowed past pain to close him off from meaningful connections. By Sunday afternoon, when Valerie called to say she was on her way back and would pick up Tyler soon, Garrett felt a surprising reluctance to see the weekend end. "Can Mr. Donovan come for dinner sometime?" Tyler asked his mother when she arrived at Garrett's penthouse, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief after her difficult trip. "He makes really good spaghetti tacos. We invented them when we couldn't decide what to have for dinner." Valerie raised an eyebrow at Garrett, who shrugged with an embarrassed smile. "Culinary innovation at its finest," he said. "I'd like to hear all about your weekend," she told her son. "But first, I need to talk with Mr. Donovan privately. Why don't you gather your things?" Once Tyler was out of earshot, Valerie's expression grew serious. "Thank you for this. It means more than I can say, especially after—" She hesitated. "James is being transferred to a long-term treatment facility. He's finally agreed to medication and therapy. It's going to be a long road, but for the first time in years I'm hopeful he might find some stability." "How do you feel about that?" Garrett asked carefully. "Relieved, mostly. For Tyler's sake, and for James too. He was a good man once, before the illness took over." She looked directly at Garrett then. "But that chapter of my life is closed romantically, if that's what you're really asking." The directness of her statement caught him off guard. "Valerie, about what I said before I left on Friday." "Did you mean it?" she interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "About wanting to be part of our lives, because Tyler is already getting attached to you, and I need to protect him from more disappointment." "I meant it," Garrett confirmed, taking a step closer to her. "But there's something you should know first." He took a deep breath. "The company is in trouble. The break-in wasn't random. Someone targeted specific files related to the Warehouse District project, and early indications suggest it might have been an inside job." Valerie's expression shifted to concern. "What does that mean for Donovan Enterprises?" "Best case scenario, a major delay while we shore up security and restructure the deal. Worst case," he didn't finish the sentence. The worst case was too devastating to contemplate. Years of work destroyed, his reputation damaged, possibly even bankruptcy if certain contingencies were triggered. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "And given the timing, everyone with access is a suspect, including me." Garrett winced at her perceptiveness. "The thought crossed my mind briefly," he admitted. "You're new. You have access to my files. You were conspicuously out of town when it happened. But I know you, Valerie. Whatever this is, you're not part of it." "How can you be so sure?" she asked quietly. "You've known me less than 4 months, because I've watched you build relationships with everyone from the maintenance staff to the board members. I've seen your integrity in action daily. And," he added with a small smile, You're terrible at hiding your emotions. You'd make a lousy corporate spy. A tentative smile touched her lips. I don't know whether to be flattered by your faith in me or offended by the assessment of my acting skills. The tension between them eased slightly, and Garrett found himself drawn closer to her. What I'm trying to say, albeit poorly, is that whatever happens with the company, my feelings for you and Tyler won't change. If anything, this situation has clarified what truly matters to me. Valerie studied him for a long moment. And what is that exactly? Not what, but who, Garrett corrected gently. You, Tyler, the possibility of building something real together. Before she could respond, Tyler bounded back into the room, his backpack stuffed haphazardly with belongings. Mom, can Mr. Donovan come over for Christmas? I want to show him the special ornament we always put on top of the tree. Valerie looked at Garrett, a new softness in her expression. That's up to Mr. Donovan, honey. He might have other plans. I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be, Garrett said honestly. The week that followed tested Garrett's newfound clarity in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The investigation into the data breach revealed that Jason Reynolds, his CFO and supposed friend, had been selling information to a rival development company for months. The betrayal cut deep, but not as deeply as it once might have. With Valerie by his side professionally, her organizational skills and intuitive understanding of people proving invaluable in the crisis, Garrett found strength he didn't know he possessed. When the city council meeting finally arrived, Garrett presented a revised proposal for the warehouse district, one that incorporated affordable housing and community spaces alongside the commercial development. It was a departure from his original vision, influenced by countless conversations with Valerie about balance and social responsibility. This isn't just about profit margins anymore, he explained to the council members. It's about creating something that serves the entire community, that honors the district's history while building toward a more inclusive future. The proposal passed unanimously, and the standing ovation from community members who had previously opposed the development felt more satisfying than any deal he had ever closed. Congratulations, Valerie said afterward, her pride evident. You've changed more than a development plan this month. I had an excellent teacher, he replied, taking her hand in a gesture that felt both new and somehow familiar. Would you and Tyler join me for dinner tonight? I have something I'd like to discuss with you both. Over a celebratory meal at Bedford Falls' most charming restaurant, which happened to have an excellent children's menu, Garrett had carefully confirmed, he presented his proposition. The thing is, he explained to a wide-eyed Tyler, I have this house on the lake that I hardly ever use. It has a big yard perfect for a dog, and there's a room that would make an amazing art studio for a budding comic book creator. He glanced at Valerie, whose expression was carefully neutral. I was thinking, maybe you and your mom might like to come stay there sometimes, or, he added, his heart racing, maybe more than sometimes. Tyler looked to his mother questioningly. Like, move in with Mr. Donovan? Valerie took a careful sip of her water before responding. What Mr. Donovan is trying to say, in his rather roundabout way, is that he cares about us very much and wants to spend more time together. She looked directly at Garrett then. But I think we need to take things one step at a time. Maybe we could start with dinner at the lake house this weekend. Garrett nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her approach. Of course, one step at a time. But can we still get a dog? Tyler asked hopefully. The laughter that followed broke the tension, and as they continued their meal, Garrett found himself imagining a future far different from the solitary, achievement-focused existence he had planned for himself. A future with bedtime stories and science fair projects, with morning kisses and shared dreams. A future built on something more valuable than real estate or corporate success. 6 months later, on a perfect summer evening, Garrett stood on the dock behind his lake house, now truly a home filled with Tyler's artwork and Valerie's touches, watching as mother and son tried to teach their enthusiastic golden retriever puppy to swim. The dog, aptly named Pancake in honor of that first weekend, paddled joyfully between them, his expression one of pure canine bliss. He's getting better, Garrett called out, snapping a photo with his phone. These moments, the ordinary, perfect snippets of family life, had become his most treasured possessions. Later, as Tyler slept soundly upstairs, Garrett and Valerie sat on the porch swing, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. I've been thinking, she said quietly, About what you said that day at the bakery, about it being a simple kindness, one human to another. Garrett smiled at the memory. Not my most honest moment. There was nothing simple about how you affected me even then. Valerie shifted to look at him. But you were right about the kindness part. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, the willingness to see someone truly and offer help without judgment. She reached up to touch his face gently. You gave me more than a job that day. You gave me hope. And you gave me a family, Garrett replied, his voice thick with emotion. Something I never knew I was missing until I found you both. As the stars emerged above the tranquil lake, Garrett Donovan reflected on the strange and winding path that had led him to this moment of perfect contentment. A chance encounter, a simple question about leftover bread, and the courage to step beyond the safe boundaries of his carefully controlled existence had transformed not just his life, but the lives of the woman and child now inextricably woven into the fabric of his heart. Some might call it fate, others coincidence. Garrett preferred to think of it as the result of one moment of genuine human connection, a reminder that behind the roles we play and the facades we maintain, we all share the same fundamental needs for understanding, acceptance, and love. And sometimes finding those things is as simple and as profound as the willingness to truly see another person when they stand before you, asking for help.